I give to the audience. So, ja genau, Fragen und wir nehmen erst Rednerinnen erst. Genau, please.
Hello, thank you. My name is Melissa Fuedo, and these both presentations were very interesting. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. Ms. Nowshin, you spoke about the issue that happened where you were cut out of a picture, and I think the same thing happened to an Ugandan activist, Vanessa Nakati, I think. And my question is, how do you navigate these spaces that are very white, very racist as a woman of color? And the second question is, you were speaking about unequal terms of trade, especially in African countries or countries of the global south. And my question is, how do we equalize these economic streams or the trading between these countries without risking even more damage to the environment? And my third question to Mr. Ogada is, you were speaking about protecting systems, not geographies. How does that work practically, and how does it work given that the environmental movement or environmentalism is very entrenched with colonialism, racism, and just very white? Thank you.
Dankeschön. Wir haben 3 Fragen. Die ersten beiden richten sich an Tonny. Die erste Frage war, wie geht sie denn um in dieser weißen Umweltbewegung quasi mit dieser Situation? Und die zweite Frage an Sie war, wie die Handelsbeziehungen, die so in Debalance sind, wie diese egalisieren. Tonny, over to you.
Hi, yes, thank you for the questions. I just quickly want to start by acknowledging it was amazing for me to be here and hear the presentation. Up to now, I learned so much. Now, quickly jumping to the question, I think the first one, it's not easy, I guess. So when I was writing this article where I decided to call out or shed light on this whole internalized racism, I also, of course, mentioned Vanessa, and at the same time, I mentioned how the problem is even when you speak out, that your whole story becomes about you being a victim and not you being someone who, as a change maker, as an agent of change. So that's even more difficult, right? Like we have to keep telling our story, keep building our identity, and keep fighting that. So you do the main fight. Like in my case, of course, this whole planet is, of course, also mine, and I want to make sure the policies that are getting decided, and that would have immense impact on the country I grew up in, that's Bangladesh, and also the countries of global south. But at the same time, how do I make sure, like even inside where I'm fighting, there's all this internalized problems? I think one thing I found is like there is no alternative to speaking out, and even though it's unjust and it's also kind of like an extra burden that we as women of color, like a person of color, we have to carry when we are in the main fight, and we always have to do these sub fights on the side. But at the same time, once we start speaking out, we also find allies. We find people who have been through either the same thing or people who realize it's the unjust and ready to fight for it, and then they stand beside you, and then the burden becomes less. So I guess in this regard I would say it's not easy to navigate, but at the same time it's also kind of, it helps to find allies, it helps to find speaking out. And I think for me, one of the motivation, there was a moment when I was writing this article that would get published, there was even a moment when I was like crying just because how difficult it was, and because there was all of these dynamics involved. And at the same time, there was one moment where even from Greenpeace, there was like, they were trying to settle it before they were requesting me to not publish it. And then if we could just settle without going ahead with it. And for me, the main thing was also, it wasn't about just me anymore. And I knew there were much more younger people who also wants to be in these spaces and they cannot be. So I think somehow this vision and kind of at the bit of like this greed that, no, I'm not going to leave, and it's your problem if you're racist, it's not my problem. So I think it was also that gave me a lot of power to make it not my problem. If you are limited by your understanding of the world and you cannot deal with me just because of how I look, that's your problem, you need to deal with it, I'm not going to leave the room. I guess that helps, like a certain kind of power to go on. And the second question,
can you just stop? I think it's I'd like to translate. Sie sagt, das ist nicht ganz einfach, also auf die Frage, wie geht sie um mit dieser Situation, eine Schwarze zu sein, die hier ausgegrenzt wird oder ausgeschlossen wird aus der Kommunikation, oder eine Person of Color. Sie sagt, es ist nicht einfach, weil sobald du da die Stimme erhebst, riskierst du, dass du zum Opfer gemacht wirst. Und du bist nicht Opfer, sondern du bist eine Aktivistin, die hier was vorantreiben will, und du bist auch in diesem Thema eigentlich eine Aktivistin und du führst einen Kampf, dass sich etwas verändert. Und das ist eine extra Last, die sie tragen muss als Person of Color. Und das ist total unfair, aber es gibt es gibt keine Alternative dazu. Und das Gute ist, und das, was ihr auch Kraft gegeben hat, ist, dass sie in dem Moment, wo sie dann gesprochen hat, auch Alliierte gefunden hat, und das hat geholfen, und sie hat sich immer wieder bewusst machen müssen, dass es nicht um sie geht, sondern dass sie einfach in einer Situation und in einer Position jetzt ist, um diesen Kampf auch für andere zu führen. Und das ist das, was ihr Kraft gegeben hat. Danke, and to the second.
Yeah, and to the second, I think with the trade, I think is one of the first things we would need to start acknowledging that how, at this moment, what we understand about any like cooperation or any way for a country to get money, or the way the whole economic system is built around injustices. So when we even talk about trades, I think there needs to be a lot of like knowledge transfer. Like we need to rethink the way we have this intellectual property rights. How do we advance or protect that the ones who are the early accumulators, and they have all of these advantages, and how they always use it for their own protecting their business and profit. And we need to fundamentally question that and change that, because this was done at a cost of immense human cost. Like it was done with lots of sacrifices, and not chosen like free sacrifices, but then that means the fruit of it needs to be shared equally. So in terms of a lot of the relationship, we need to build in the discussion of reparation. I think that's very fundamental in forms of all forms of trade, and a lot of the whole to these big global platforms we have like World Bank, IMF. We need to bring this discussion into those center and kind of fundamentally start bringing justice in these questions, and not just make it about banana versus the computer, and also like, oh, what can you do? You have nice animals. Okay, you just do tourism, and that's the only way you can get money. So we need to flip that around and kind of bring in those questions. And otherwise, within the main framework of just the whole neoliberal economics and the trade relationship, it's not possible, even with that data, we can see, like, as I was saying, this whole shifted terms of trade and Prebisch-Singer theorem, it's now even proven, it's possible to even prove with data that this is what happens when these countries get engaged in trade. So what we can do, I think, even to use those data to make it even more visible and start bringing in justice elements, and there would be a lot of resistance, but I guess without having that discussion, just with economics, we won't be able to solve this unfairness. So we have to open up and keep bringing in those different elements and shift the discussion and make it more broader. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tonny. Die Frage war ja, wie bringt man diese Handelsbeziehungen ins Gleichgewicht? Und sie sagt, das ist nochmal betont, wie fundamental es ist, das zu ändern, und dass es aber sehr herausfordernd ist und dass es nicht durch Ökonomie geht, sondern dass es eigentlich darum geht, überhaupt diese Erkenntnis, die ja jetzt eine bewiesene Erkenntnis ist, in die Diskussion hineinzubringen und eben die Diskussion fundamental zu verändern, sodass es nicht darum geht, naja, cool, ihr habt doch irgendwie süße Tiere, macht Tourismus, sondern dass es auch darum gehen muss, zum Beispiel darüber zu sprechen, jetzt historisch gesehen, was da für Reparationszahlungen auch fällig sind über die gewesenen Ungerechtigkeiten und wie man das auch in Zukunft auch anders gestalten kann, dass wirklich Gerechtigkeit in diesen Handelsbeziehungen und deren Entwicklung auch etabliert wird. Also es geht um eine Veränderung des Diskurses, datenbasiert auch. Thank you so much, Tonny. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you.
The question was, die Frage war ja, wie funktioniert das praktisch, jetzt nicht Geografien, sondern Systeme, Spezies, Menschen zu schützen?
Yeah, protection of systems, it's about changing our mindset really, because what exists out there is systems. There's agricultural systems where people are farmers, there's livestock production systems where they're rearing livestock, there's fishing systems where people are fishing using wetlands. So biodiversity has coexisted with those human production systems for millennia. And I think those of you who are not scientists, you must start questioning scientists. You must. When your bank offers you a new credit card, you're reading the fine print very closely. If you buy a new type of food item, you read the ingredients. But nobody questions scientists. Scientists lie. And I'm a scientist, I can tell you that. So when science tells us that Kenya is the cradle of mankind, and mankind has been in Kenya for 1.2 million years, science cannot tell you that mankind is now a problem in 2022. So we have to question science. And I think we have to also realize that tourism it can be a very harmful force in that it makes us imagine that we are dependent on an external force or an external person. If you maintain your house nice and comfortable, it's for you and your family or your children. It's not for visitors. If visitors come and have a good time, that's nice. But the reason you live in a nice, clean house is for you. And it's that type of thinking that we have to get. And I think the COVID pandemic sort of revealed this, that we can actually do pretty well without tourism. And even New York Times, Washington Post, they all wrote that wildlife is going to be killed in Africa because of the shutdown in tourism from the pandemic. Tourists do not save wildlife. It's the rangers and the local people who save wildlife. And they are going on with their patrols, with or without the tourists. So these are the questions we have to bring to the front and center, but we must put ourselves first. Even now we are in this beautiful Dürnstein Abbey. It was made beautiful like this for themselves. They did not make it for me, although I love it. These paintings was not done for me. So we must consider that tourism expands our horizons and it's good, but it can be a very harmful force when it's put ahead of interests of the local people. So we must protect our production systems. Let's not look at, there's something they say like alternative livelihoods, and it's something conservationists like saying. When you're told alternative livelihoods, it means alternative to what you've been doing successfully for the last 5,000 years. And that's not a good alternative. They're creating dependency. So I think we need to make peace with that. And as young people coming into the field, you must be prepared to question these systems that you're finding in place. That's how human societies develop. So don't be afraid to question. It is, there will be people who will, especially in Africa, young people are sort of not expected to question the elders. When the elders are wrong, don't keep quiet. This is about our environment and our world. Thank you.
Unser Mindset ändern, Wissenschaftler in Frage stellen, weil Wissenschaftler lügen. Er ist selber einer. Tourismus kann eine sehr zerstörerische Kraft sein, wenn es uns einredet, dass wir abhängig sind. Wir sollten unser Haus nett machen für uns und für unsere Familie, und wenn dann Fremde kommen und sich wohlfühlen, ist es auch okay, aber nicht für die, die kommen. Und Covid hat gezeigt in Afrika, dass es eigentlich ganz gut auch ohne Tourismus geht. Die Financial Times und andere haben ja geschrieben, dass es die Befürchtung gibt, jetzt werden haufenweise Tiere getötet in Afrika, weil keine Touristen da sind. Und er sagt, das ist ein völliger Humbug. Ja, die Ranger und die lokale Bevölkerung beschützt weiterhin, und das ändert nichts. Und es geht darum, sich selbst in den Vordergrund zu stellen und sozusagen Tourismus an die zweite Stelle. Es ist eine Frage des Mindsets. We didn't have a question to you. Do you have an answer? Or a comment that you would like to make, having heard those two, in the light of convivialism?
Yeah, perhaps a comment, because what I find quite interesting to see, perhaps a common point in the three talks, and this is the sort of the new form of...
You could actually speak
But now I just
Yeah,
started.
okay, sorry. Okay, good. Sorry.
So the common point in the three talks, I think, is the idea that sort of externalization are the new form of colonialism. So as we had colonialism in previous centuries, now you have externalization of different things, of conservation, of carbon offsets, but also of toxic activities, which are transported to the global south, while in the global north we can perhaps have a safe environment. And this is, I think, a movement which could be observed in the three different talks you had. So with different nuances, but at the end, this is, I guess, the common observation. And as we had at the times of colonialism, sort of colonial role also working in the global south, what you have now is what you mentioned before, state capture. So you don't need your own colonial state in these countries, because you can just capture the national states for providing services, for this sort of externalization. And of course, especially for those who are interested in provide some change necessary to contain climate change, the crucial question is how to contain, how to develop instruments for contain this sort of externalization. Because as you know, capital is quite flexible. If you have restrictions in the global north, they go to the other parts of the world in which they can pollute, in which they can externalize their toxic activities. I just like to mention one single example. I don't know if you are following this case, because I think it's a quite relevant case, and also to emphasize the role of courts in this process. So there is a case in the court of Hamm in Germany, in which a peasant from Peru are fighting against this big company, RWE, so an energy company, which use carbon for producing energy. And through this use of carbon, some ice formations in Peru is somehow has been dissolved in that way that the house in which this peasant lives is now quite destroyed by inundations. And the court first accepted this case, establishing a connection between the dissolution of ice in Peru and the activity of RWE in Germany. And this is really a very, I would say, promising case in terms of establishing a jurisprudence for exactly contain this sort of externalization of activities, showing that there are entanglements between what happens in different parts of the world. If we are talking about climate, we are talking about the planet, not about nations, not about jurisdictions. So we are talking about the whole planet. And therefore, I think following this case could be also interesting to understand future developments.
Yeah, that was a nice comment. Ohne Frage eine Antwort. Er hat so beschrieben den gemeinsamen Punkt in allen drei Vorträgen, dass es eigentlich darum geht, die Zusammenhänge in den Griff zu kriegen. Also diese Carbon Offsets, dann diesen Export von Gift letztlich, diese Landnahme. Es geht darum, dass wir Instrumente zu entwickeln, um die Externalisierung negativer Folgen in den Griff zu kriegen und zu begrenzen. Und er hat dann zitiert einen Rechtsfall, wo RWE in Deutschland in Hamm gerade angeklagt ist von einem Menschen aus Peru. Bitte? Angeklagt ist von einem Menschen in Peru, in dessen Haus irgendwie was passiert ist. Das hätten Sie auf Deutsch sagen können, oder können mich da noch korrigieren. Und das eigentlich Frappante daran ist, dass das Gericht diesen Fall überhaupt akzeptiert hat. Und damit akzeptiert, dass solche globalen Zusammenhänge und Verflechtungen quasi ein Fall für Rechtsprechung sind.
Ja, der ist ein Gletscher, der
ein Gletscher, danke.
Ja,
genau. Eis schmilzt.
Ja,
ja,
genau. Und von daher, der Zusammenhang ist eindeutig. Das heißt, durch Produktion von Energie, in dem dann auch Kohle benutzt wird, dann gibt es eher der Wärmung, gibt es dann Verschmelzen, Gletscher, und das führt dann zu der Überschwemmung, und von daher könnte dann dieser Bauer dann erfolgreich klagen. Also es gibt noch keinen Rechtsspruch, aber alleine, dass das dann angenommen wird bei einem deutschen Gericht, das ist schon eine sehr, sehr versprechender Fall.
Fortschritt.
So.
Und mit dieser optimistischen Note gehen wir jetzt zu unserem Mittagessen.